Hi, I'm Tomas Fann, the chairperson of the Coalition for Clean and Fair Elections in Malaysia, or more commonly known as Bersih 2.0. It is my great honor to address all of you on this occasion, the 40th anniversary of the May 18 uprising in Gwangju. The hundreds of lives sacrificed for the sake of democracy and freedom 40 years ago in Gwangju triggered a wave of struggles for democracy and freedom not just in South Korea but also throughout Asia and beyond. The ripples of change did not bypass Malaysia, but it eventually reached our shores 38 years later when we saw a peaceful transition of government for the first time in 2018. But unfortunately, the forces that were deposed 2 years ago fought back and managed to overthrow our democratically elected government, the Alliance of Hope, in a political coup when some MPs joined forces with the old ruling parties to form a new government on the 1st of March 2020. This is a very tragic development for democracy and freedom in Malaysia, that in less than 2 years, the people's mandate given to the new government in a general election can be so easily nullified by the scheming of political elites. What happened to us is a reminder that democracy is under threat, not only in Malaysia but globally. Many countries in Asia that had experienced the springs of freedom and democracy have returned back to the winter of authoritarianism and curtailment of freedom. We had hoped that Malaysia would have been a beacon of hope for the region, but it was not to be. But I believe that the setback in our struggle for democratic reforms and freedom is only temporary. We have to remind ourselves that change is not an event, but a process, a long-term process, and indeed a never-ending process to push for a system of government that elevates the dignity of every human being, empower us to make informed decisions about our future, and an electoral system that allows the people to voice that choice. We also need to understand why democracies worldwide are voting in leaders that are clearly not committed to the ideals of democracy, freedom, or human rights itself. Right-wing populist leaders who are xenophobic, nationalistic, who leans towards authoritarianism and carries an anti-elitist message are being voted into power. We have to ask ourselves the question, why are people willing to surrender their own freedom, democratic rights, and even their dignity as a person to vote in a person who is likely to trample upon these ideals? This is not an easy question to answer, but I believe it has got something to do with the fulfillment of their basic needs as a person. The need for food, shelter, jobs, and security. When these are lacking in a democracy, people choose to surrender their rights, freedom, and some politicians come along and promises all these basic needs, and usually by blaming others within or outside their country. We saw in post-World War I Germany, where Hitler wrote on the Germans' economic depression and came to power blaming the Jews and the Allied forces who defeated them in World War I. Hitler was democratically elected, and so are many of today's right-wing populist leaders. Democracy as a standalone ideal is not enough to protect human rights and dignity. It has to show that it is compatible with inclusive and stable socio-economic policies and able to bring prosperity and security to the masses. Democracy and prosperity are not a zero-sum game. Those who assert that it is are just justifying their own authoritarian tendency. We can see many examples of successful modern democracy, in particular in the Scandinavian and some Western European countries, where they consistently rank in the top percentile of the most prosperous countries in the Legatum's Prosperity Index. Countries fail not because of democracy, but weak institutions and flawed electoral systems that allow bad politicians to stay in power, to mismanage and oftentimes amass wealth for themselves and for their cronies. How should we move forward then? Just as most of us can agree that the economy cannot be the supreme God that guide every government policies and actions, we cannot hold that democracy is the be-all and end-all. Democracy as a system of government where the common people has direct or indirect political power is still the best system to guard the interests of the people from the scourge of dictators and the elite political class who only seeks to perpetuate modern-day feudalism. Democracy and institutions that represents and protects it must remain strong in order to hold political parties and politicians to account, and that any policies advocated by them must adhere to the established democratic spirit and processes of the country. The values of human rights, inclusiveness, freedom of speech, expression and assembly are non-negotiable in the push for economic prosperity. Again, I want to say, the choice between economic prosperity and democracy is a false dichotomy. Both could coexist splendidly. And going forward, we have to argue and defend this fact. Thank you very much.